The Bible is such an incredible book, and it was an absolute privilege to read the whole way through the NIV 1984 version of the Bible. It took me over 3.5 years around. I really feel inspired to do that again. This time I'm going to be reading from the Message translation, Eugene Peterson, and I'll do it one chapter a day. So it'd be great if you want to join me. I would like to read the last passage of the preface because it gives a bit of background as to the Message Bible. It says the Message is a reading Bible. It's not intended to replace the excellent study Bibles that are available. My intent here is simply to get people reading it who don't know that the Bible is readable at all, at least by them, and to get people who long ago lost interest in the Bible to read it again. I leave out verse numbers to encourage unimpeded reading. No Bibles had verse numbers for the first 1,500 years, but I haven't tried to make it easy. There is much in the Bible that is hard to understand. So at some point along the way, soon or late, it will be important to get a standard study Bible to facilitate further study. Meanwhile, read in order to live, praying as you read. God, let it be with me just as you say. And God, we pray your blessing upon the reading of your word. I'm going to read the introduction of the books of Moses and then the introduction of the book of Genesis. And then tomorrow I'll start on Genesis chapter 1. So the introduction of the books of Moses. An enormous authority and dignity have, through the centuries, developed around the first 5 books of the Bible, commonly known as the books of Moses. Over the course of many centuries, they account for a truly astonishing amount of reading and writing, study and prayer, teaching and preaching. God is the primary concern of these books that accounts for the authority and the dignity. But it is not only God, we get included. That accounts for the widespread and intense human interest. We want to know what's going on. We want to know how we fit into things. We don't want to miss out. The books of Moses are made up mostly of stories and signposts. The stories show us God working with and speaking to men and women in a rich variety of circumstances. God is presented to us not in ideas and arguments, but in events and actions that involve us, each of us personally. The signposts provide immediate and practical direction to guide us into behaviour that is appropriate to our humanity and honouring to God. The simplicity of the storytelling and signposting in these books makes what is written here as accessible to children as to adults. But the simplicity, as in many simple things, is also profound, inviting us into a lifetime of growing participation in God's saving ways with us. An image of human growth suggests a reason for the powerful pull of these stories and signposts on so many millions of men, women and children to live as God's people. The sketch shows the 5 books as 5 stages of growth in which God creates first a cosmos and then a people for his glory. Genesis is conception. After establishing the 5 elements by which God will do his work of creation and salvation and judgment in the midst of human sin and rebellion in chapters 1 to 11, God conceives a people to whom he will reveal himself as a God of salvation, and through them, over time, to everyone on earth. God begins small with one man, Abraham. The embryonic people of God grow in the womb. Gradually, details and then more details become evident as the embryo takes shape. Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob and Esau, Rachel, Joseph and his brothers. The pregnancy develops. Life is obviously developing in that womb, but there is also much that is not clear and visible. The background history is vague, the surrounding nations and customs veiled in a kind of mist. But the presence of life, God conceived life, is kicking and robust. Exodus is birth and infancy. The gestation of the people of God lasts a long time, but finally the birth pangs start. Egyptian slavery gives the first intimations of the conception to come. When Moses arrives on the scene to preside over the birth itself, 10 fierce plagues on Egypt accompany the contraception that brings the travail to completion. At the Red Sea, the waters break. The people of God tumble out of the womb onto dry ground, and their life as a free people of God begins. Moses leads them crawling and toddling to Sinai. They are fed. God reveals himself to them at the mountain. They begin to get a sense of their parent. They learn the language of freedom and salvation. A word here, a word there. The 10 words, commandments, as a beginning. Their basic vocabulary. The signposts begin to go up. Do this, don't do that. But the largest part of their infant life is God, the living God. And they explore the deep and wide world of God. Worship becomes their dominant and most important activity. An enormous amount of attention is given to training them in worship, building the structures for worship, mastering the procedures. They are learning how to give their full attention in obedience and adoration to God. Leviticus is schooling. As infancy develops into childhood, formal schooling takes place. There's a lot to know. They need some structure and arrangements to keep things straight. Reading, writing, arithmetic. But for the people of God, the basic curriculum has to do with God and their relationship with God. Leviticus is the MacGuffey's reader of the people of God. It is an almost totally audio-visual book, giving a picture of and ritual in the sacrifice and feast for a pivotal way in which God's people keep alert and observant to the ways their relationships with God goes awry, sin, and the ways they are restored to forgiveness and innocence, salvation. Everyday life consists of endless and concrete detail, much of it having to do with our behaviour before God and with one another. And so, of course, Leviticus necessarily consists also of endless detail. Numbers is adolescence. The years of adolescence are critical to understand who we are. We are advanced enough physically to be able, for the most part, to take care of ourselves. We are developed enough mentally, with some obvious limitations, to think for ourselves. We discover that we are not simply extensions of our parents, and we are not just mirror images of our culture. But who are we? Especially, who are we as people of God? The people of God in Numbers are new at these emerging independent operations of behaving and thinking, and so inadvertently make a lot of mistakes. Rebellion is one of the more conspicuous mistakes. They test out their unique identity by rejecting the communities with parents and culture. It's the easiest and cheapest way to be myself, as we like to say. But it turns out that there isn't much to say to the self. This is thus asserted. Maturity requires the integration, not the amputation of what we have received through our conception and birth, our infancy and schooling. The people of God have extraordinarily long adolescence in the wilderness, nearly 40 years of it. Deuteronomy is adulthood. The mature life is a complex operation. Growing up is a long process, and growing up in God takes the longest time. During their 40 years spent in the wilderness, the people of God developed from that full-term embryo, brought to birth on the far shore of the Red Sea, are carried and led, nourished and protected under Moses to the place of God's revelation at Sinai, taught and trained, discipled and blessed. Now they are ready to live as free and obedient men and women in the new land, the promised land. They are ready for adulthood, ready to be as grown-ups inwardly as they are outwardly. They are ready to live as a free people, formed by God, as a holy people, transformed by God. They still have a long way to go, as do we all. But all the conditions for maturity are there. The book of Deuteronomy gathers up that entire process of becoming a people of God and turns it into a sermon and a song and a blessing. The strongest and key word in Deuteronomy is love. Love is the most characteristic and comprehensive act of the human being. We are most ourselves when we love. We are most the people of God when we love. But love is not an abstract defined out of a dictionary. In order to love maturely, we have to live and absorb and enter into this world of salvation and freedom. Find ourselves in the stories, become familiar with and follow the signposts, learn the life of worship and realize our unique identity as the people of God who love. The books of Moses are foundational to the 61 books that follow in our Bibles. A foundation, though, is not a complete building, but the anticipation of one, and an elaborate moral infrastructure is provided here for what is yet to come. Each book that follows is one way or another picks up and develops some aspects of the messianic salvation involved in becoming the people of God. But it is always on this foundation. This foundation of stories and signposts have proved over and over to be solid and enduring. A note on translating the name of God. In the original Hebrew text of the Old Testament, the generic name for divinity used by both Israel and its neighbours is translated God with a capital G, or God with a small g, but the unique and distinctively personal name for God that was revealed to Moses at the burning bush in excuse me, in Exodus 3:13-14, I have translated as God with a capital G. The Jewish community earlier on substituted Lord for the unique name out of reverence. Our lips are not worthy to speak the name. And caution lest we inadvertently blaspheme by saying God's name in vain. Most Christian translators continue that practice. This is now the introduction to the book of Genesis. First, God. God is the subject of life. God is foundational for living. If we don't have a sense of the primacy of God, we will never get it right. Get life right, get our lives right. Not God at the margins, not God as an option, not God on the weekends. God at the centre and circumference. God first and last. God, God, God. Genesis gets us off on the right foot. Genesis pulls us into a sense of reality that it is God-shaped and God-filled. It gives us a vocabulary for speaking accurately and comprehensively about our lives, where we come from and where we are going, what we think and what we do, the people we live with and how to get along with them, the troubles we find ourselves in, and the blessings that keep arriving. Genesis uses words to make a foundation that is solid and true. Everything we think and do and feel is material in a building operation in which we are engaged all our life long. This is immense significance in everything that we do. Our speech and our actions and our prayers are all, every detail of them, involved in this vast building operation comprehensively known as the kingdom of God. But we don't build the foundation. The foundation is given. The foundation is firmly in place. Jesus concluded his first famous teaching by teaching us that there are two ways to go about our lives. We can build on sand or we can build on rock. No matter how wonderful we build, if we build on sand, it will all fall to pieces like a house of cards. We build on what is already there, on the rock. Genesis is a verbal witness to that rock. God's creative acts, God's intervening and gracious judgments, God's call to a life of faith, God's making covenant with us. But Genesis presents none of this to us as an abstract, bloodless truth or principle. We are given a succession of stories with named people who loved and quarrelled, believed and doubted, had children and married, experienced sin and grace. If we pay attention, we find that we ourselves are living variations of these very stories. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and his sons, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, Joseph and his brothers. The stories show clearly that we are never outsiders or spectators to anything in heaven and earth. God doesn't work impersonally from space. He works with us where we are, and he finds us no matter what we do, whether good or bad. We continue to be part of everything that God is doing. Nobody can drop out. there's no place to drop out to. So we may as well get started and take our place in the story at the beginning.